The anointed ones, welcome. Make sure the person wasn't a seed if you believe that burying them would kill them, because this is something they never anticipated. Their greatest error was isolating you. They gave you to destiny on a silver platter rather than just pushing you away. Heaven was busy composing the narrative twist they'll never get over as they celebrated your alleged collapse, as if it were the season finale of a small-time sitcom. The strategy was obvious. Let's face it, cut you off, discredit you, and make you feel invisible, unimportant, and unwanted. They believed that if you were disconnected, you would also be disconnected from electricity. But you burst through rather than crumble. And now they're choking on the fallout from their own treachery, not simply watching you ascend. The indisputable proof that you didn't need them at all is what's smothering them, not guilt. The reality is that social rejection triggers the same brain regions as physical pain, according to psychological research. The twist they failed to consider, however, is that when someone's suffering motivates them to pursue their goals, the change is irrevocable. And they're getting spiritual asthma from your glow-up, honey. So, fasten your seatbelt. This is not only a tale of loneliness. It is a tale of exile turning into elevation, of quiet becoming your weapon, and of those who fled now stumbling back, struggling to breathe. They believed that cutting you off would ruin you. Let's face it. As it happens, they just provided the selected individual with a strong enough Wi-Fi connection and some unbroken tranquility to download divine tactics. Let's begin. First of all, your banishment was a holy incubation, but they thought it was an end. Your banishment just served to awaken something they were never prepared for, but they thought it would be the end. They were so certain of their superiority that they pushed you away. They believed that if you were cut off, you would no longer have access to happiness, life, or advancement. They believed that the last nail in your coffin would be their departure. However, it turns out that they were unaware of the workings of selected ones. They were unaware that destiny unlocks a whole world while life closes one door. They believed your narrative was coming to a conclusion. In reality, however, they sent you into the most potent phase of your process, incubation. You were being nurtured in secret while others sat contentedly in their circles and cliques. The exact seclusion they weaponized turned into the hallowed place where your resistance solidified into something unbreakable, your knowledge grew, and your vision developed. Unbeknownst to you, the same individuals who denigrated you were forcing you into a spiritual greenhouse. You were hidden, not dead, like a seed buried in the ground. The divine was irrigating you. No attention, no cheers, no phony backing. God and you alone. Additionally, you were laying the groundwork for things they couldn't see. Deep roots, genuine strength, and silent power, while they misunderstood your quiet season for loss. They expected you to return pleading, but instead you returned changed, stronger, more focused, sharper, and wiser rather than resentful. They are now left in a state of perplexity. How could someone they believed to be beneath them come back with more clarity, elegance, and power than before? That's what's burning them right now. Because your return is indisputable and not boisterous. A soul that was divinely wired for resurrection was attempted to be buried. They're now compelled to see you flourish in areas they never imagined you could achieve without their help. They believed that exile was your fate, but you were only getting started. They discovered too late that what they pushed away was exactly what they needed to live, and now they're trapped watching the glow-up they attempted to halt. Number 2, you were the foundation all along. Isolation didn't break you. They anticipated that everything in your life would collapse when they cut you off. You were the one relying on them in their thoughts. It was you who benefited from the relationship. They believed you would collapse the instant they retreated. They were holding to you the whole time, but they were unaware that you were never clinging to them. You were more than simply a member of the group. You were the unifying factor. The fissures appeared as soon as they took you away. They thought you were the one who was dependent. However, they are now seeing that they were consuming your light, power, and knowledge. And the energy changed without you. The discussions sank to nothing. The plan stalled. The laughter was quieter. Because you were really the one carrying the show from backstage, even though they believed they were the primary act. And the whole building is swaying now that you're gone. Since you were never standing on them in the first place, you didn't collapse. They were on top of you. You provided depth, direction, and equilibrium. You were the one who created peace, offered truth, and graciously held space. They took the friendship, the connection, and the team for granted, but it felt alive because of you. It's dead without you, which is why they just understand it now. They're struggling with that awful reality. You kept your worth to yourself. You didn't plead for attention. But once you were gone, the void cried out more loudly than words could. They are now coming to the realization that they lost more than just a person. They also lost the foundation that held everything together. And the most challenging aspect for them? You're succeeding in their absence. You've been raised, not merely survived. You're more focused, composed, clearer, and strangely, even more strong. When they cut you off, they thought you would shatter, but all it did was relieve you of the burden of bearing individuals who had no idea you were their fulcrum. Since you were never replaceable, they are now left to attempt to replicate the calm, vitality, and clarity you effortlessly offered, but they are unable to do so. Without you, nothing they construct will ever feel secure again because you were the root. Third, you transformed desertion into hallowed isolation while they weaponized it. They deliberately departed to inflict harm rather than just walking away from you. In actuality, they meant to ruin you by their absence, not merely get rid of you. They intended for you to feel abandoned, bewildered, and unworthy. It wasn't quiet. It was a strategy, a planned action meant to get you to doubt your value and become unsteady. They failed to realize, however, that those who are selected don't just crumble, they change throughout time. They intended to make you feel guilty. They wanted you to feel unwelcome and sit by yourself. However, you chose to sit by yourself and learned all they were attempting to conceal from you. Clarity came to you. You discovered your own voice. Without all the cacophony they brought, you discovered how to hear yourself. You began to heal on depths they were unaware existed in that hallowed quiet that replaced the loneliness they believed would shatter you. They anticipated that you would pursue, plead, and shrink, but you breathed in the silence. You began to distance yourself from their acceptance. You began to understand that the presence of truth is where serenity can be found, not the presence of others. And truth emerged in that loneliness. It informed you that their absence revealed them rather than defining you. They believed that you would lose something if you pulled away. In actuality, however, it exposed every aspect of them. It demonstrated their insecurity, immaturity, and thirst for dominance. The version of you that would emerge from the quiet they left you in was not what they had anticipated. The isolation they intended as a kind of punishment turned into your haven. You started to realize your strength, hone your judgment, and recover aspects of yourself that had been lost in the turmoil they brought. You began entering places you didn't think you belonged in and stopped waiting for them to return. Since the version of you they left behind is no longer there, they are unsure of how to get in touch with you. You're not resentful. You're not upset. You just have freedom. And nothing frightens them more than realizing that their effort to destroy you simply made it possible for you to become someone they can no longer reach, influence, or control. They turned abandonment into a weapon. You made it into a restoration. The true story twist is that. Fourth, you discovered the frequency of truth, but their circle turned into a chamber of echoes. They believed that surrounding themselves with like-minded individuals would be sufficient to maintain their world after they cut you off. They created circles, both loud and tight, echo chambers filled with the same thoughts, the same pointless discussions, and the same rehashed ideas. They weren't developing. All they were doing was boosting one another's pride. The fact that no one was questioning anything made the group feel secure. However, loud does not imply wisdom, and safe does not imply strength. However, you felt compelled to remain silent. However, you became attentive during that quiet instead of being disoriented. You were sitting alone, listening to a deeper voice, while others were busy arguing with each other in an attempt to feel better. You began to detect frequencies that were inaudible, unloud environments. You were getting clarity to break free, not talking to blend in. Your inner environment became a signal tower as a result of such isolation. And now you spoke with authority. You spoke with soul. Your words have substance, which they never developed. Their discussions continue to revolve around the same flimsy subjects. They spread rumors. They imitate. They never alter who they are. They just keep saying the same things. It all comes down to being noticed, correct, and in charge. However, you are speaking from depth, healing, and experience. You lived it, not just read it. And it's evident. Numbers, they believed, were a sign of strength. The louder the voice, the louder the chamber. But it was resonance, not loudness, that gave you power. You don't want to impress anybody. Impact is what you're here for. And for that reason, without even raising your voice, your presence talks louder, your words pierce deeper, and your energy strikes harder. Whether they acknowledge it or not, they now listen in quiet. Since that was the first thing that ever caused them to doubt their loudness, they mentally repeat what you said. And they know deep down that you were being honed into a voice that breaks cycles while they were echoing each other in circles. Fifth, they denied you love just to find out that you don't thrive on praise. They believed that withholding their love would cause you to break. They thought that you would become desperate as a result of their coldness, isolation, and silence. They really believed that you had come rushing to win their affection once again. What they didn't realize, however, is that you weren't famished for their attention. Rather, you were outgrowing the crumbs they were initially giving you. They offered you just enough to keep you interested, a partial compliment here, a little affirmation there. It was never true food, maybe a moment of compassion when it was convenient for them. Control was the issue. It was love masquerading as manipulation. In order to keep you emotionally hungry but never satisfied, they wanted you to rely on those little emotional breadcrumbs. They thought you would crumble when they stopped showing you love. Instead, a significant event occurred. You awoke. You understood that you were just emotionally undernourished and not weak. And you experienced true tranquility when you stopped taking advantage of their unreliability. Love doesn't feel like uncertainty. You learned. There are no restrictions on affection, and you don't have to shrink to connect. You were always too entire to live on fragments, and their removal revealed this fact rather than weakening you. You just didn't realize how much energy they were taking from you. You weren't in an urgent need of it. They're stunned now. They are seeing you shine, keep going, and remain anchored without ever looking back. And since they believe they were the prize, it's playing tricks on them. They believe the prize was their attention. The day you stopped desiring them and began to identify with yourself, however, was the true prize. They see your quiet as a sign of weakness. It was self-respect, however. They interpreted your silence as heartache. However, it was therapeutic. You weren't anticipating love. You awaited alignment. There's no turning back now that you've experienced true connection with God, with truth, and with yourself. Your hunger has increased. Your bar has been lifted. Additionally, they are no longer offered. Sixth, they unintentionally archive their own significance in their attempt to cancel you. They really believe that if you were excluded, you would vanish. They reasoned that the tale would continue as if you had never been there if they stopped bringing up your name and took you out of the group. At first, it was subtle, denying you invitations to events, keeping you out of discussions, and acting as if your contributions never occurred. By pretending you were never a significant part of the tale, they aimed to diminish your power. The problem is that they were unaware that you were the subject of the article. Silence was supposed to cancel you out, to treat you like a voice they outgrew, a phase that finished, or a mistake that went away. However, all they succeeded in doing was depriving their environment of the exact thing that made it meaningful, because they were gradually becoming themselves irrelevant while attempting to seem as if you didn't matter. You were more than a mere visitor to their life. Things had depth, movement, and meaning because of you. You were the one who pushed what needed to be addressed, kept things grounded, and ignited ideas. The dynamic failed without you. The enthusiasm became stale. The circle turned into a meaningless, repetitive cycle. They believed they would be set free by your departure. However, everything seems dry now. Their relationships seem theatrical. Their dialogues were repetitive, and they sense it in their hearts. The sole individual who gave the space real life was taken out. You weren't canceled. They stored themselves in an archive. You continued to change, develop, and move toward alignment and truth. In the meanwhile, they found themselves in a rut, attempting to stay relevant in the absence of the soul that gave everything meaning. And because you've outgrown the page, they couldn't write you in, even if they attempted to get you back into the plot. A new volume has been reached by you. You aren't a character anymore. They are reading about you in a chapter that is no longer available to them. You weren't just lost. Evolution was no longer an option for them. The one individual who could have given their flimsy plot more substance was silenced. They are now forced to repeat a storyline that lacks a conclusion, a metamorphosis, and any reality. Seventh, they failed to remember that the best conditions for revolution in heaven are solitude. They really believed that cutting you off would cause you to slow down. They thought that if you were alone, you would lose your momentum, your foothold, and maybe even your faith. They were unaware, however, that you were at the center of a pattern in heaven. To prepare his chosen ones, God has never required a large gathering. He really likes a quiet room. He works alone on his most profound projects. And you were being positioned, even if they thought you were being punished. They constructed a heavenly classroom in the stillness they made around you, not a nothingness. Instead of abandoning you, the space they created between you and the outside world let you receive instructions at a higher frequency by reducing noise. You were not banished. They called for you. You were being taken aside because the next step needed revelation, not repetition, purpose, not popularity, and attention, not distraction. They believed that removing themselves from your life would deprive you of chances. However, they just created room for alignment. They unintentionally took away everything that wasn't supposed to be with you in an attempt to hinder your path. Because you were finally able to perceive your task clearly and walk in it with confidence without their drama, views, or noise, God utilized their rejection as divine collaboration. They're perplexed now. When they see you, they question how someone they shunned became successful. They fail to realize that seclusion is preparation rather than exile in the spiritual world. And the selected ones are rebuilt in it, not only survived. In reality, what they referred to as loneliness was consecration. Refinement was what they referred to as rejection. And heaven's next instructions were delivered in the same quiet they were trying to shatter you. They didn't postpone your goal. Without even realizing it, they turned it on. The preparation was private, but the elevation is now open to the public. They'll never understand that aspect. You were never punished by them. They were setting you up. Eighth, they attempted to dim your lighthouse, but the fog revealed their own insufficiency. They believed that you were the issue because you were too intelligent, too trustworthy, and too reliable. They thus made an effort to degrade you, gradually at first, using subtle insults, deceptive remarks, and contemptuous demeanors. Then came isolation, alienation, and stillness. The idea was straightforward. They might feel like they were in the limelight at last if they could simply turn down your light. They were unaware, however, that your light was not a rival. They were under its shelter. You were lighting up everything in your immediate vicinity, not just yourself. Things made sense because of you. You maintained equilibrium with your energy. Confusion was avoided thanks to your insight. And without even saying a word, your sincerity revealed the falsehoods. They had no desire to ascend, to make their mediocrity less apparent. They just wanted you to become more subdued. However, the fog rolled in as soon as they pulled you out. Everything that had been concealed under the surface suddenly came to light. The disarray, the rumors, the insecurity, the manipulation. Because there was nothing to hide behind if your light wasn't there. Their instability had been concealed by your sincerity. Their drama had been concealed by your stability. They hated you, but you were the glue they sorely needed. Now the vibe is different without you. The same individuals who attempted to outshine you are now caught in their own bewilderment. Everyone in the group feels strange. The discussions are shallow. They no longer feel together as they once did. And because things only began to fall apart after you went, people are beginning to inquire. The sting is that what has been exposed cannot be reversed. There was no turning back once the truth was revealed by your light. They realized too late that you weren't the diversion and now dwell in their own gloom. The discernment was you. The danger wasn't you. The alignment was you. They also lost more than one individual. They lost the one thing that prevented the full visibility of their dysfunction. The fog is heavy now. You may see their imperfections, but your light remains bright. Simply said, no longer for them. Number 9. Their attempt to make you feel inferior simply served to highlight their own conceit. They told themselves that you needed to be humbled because you were becoming too self-assured, too cocky, and too conceited. In actuality, however, they meant that you were no longer squirming for their comfort. They were uneasy because you were walking in a power they couldn't control, standing in your truth, and taking ownership of your development. They thus concluded that you need a lesson. Your wings were attempted to be clipped. They withdrew assistance. They pulled away. Some murmured behind closed doors, while others became quiet. They did it all with a subdued arrogance, as if they were on a moral high ground and had been sent to bring you back to reality. But they were unaware of how incredibly conceited it is to believe that someone else's confidence has to be restored, that they somehow had the authority to choose how much light you should bear, and that they could degrade anybody. In actuality, you were never conceited. You knew. At last, you were beginning to see yourself clearly. And you didn't say you were sorry for it for once. They dubbed it pride because they were unable to equal such clarity. They termed it revolt because they were unable to carry that same courage. Your solid confidence was mistaken for ego by them, because it revealed their own mediocrity, which they didn't want to acknowledge. They had no intention of improving you. They were attempting to lower you to a level where they could feel secure once again. But in the end, they just exposed their insecurities. Their plan to degrade you revealed their insignificance. Their dread of being outgrown was shown by their drive to control, and their own lack of self-awareness was shown by their judgment. Since you didn't need their approval and the lesson they attempted to impart didn't work, they are now left to watch you ascend, unconcerned, unaffected, and unshaken. They embarrassed themselves rather than you, not by their words or actions, but by believing that your ego was the source of your power when, in reality, it came from understanding who you are. 10th, isolation revived your vision, even though they believed it would shatter your spirit. They believed they were breaking your spirit when they interrupted you. They believed you would be left bewildered, disoriented, and shattered if they took away their connection, their presence, and their attention. They believed that without their approval, you would spiral. However, they were unaware that clarity emerged the instant they vanished. You weren't ruined by their departure. The noise was eliminated. All of the voices you were attempting to appease suddenly fell quiet. The burden of feigning disapproval, adjusting their views all the time, and dancing around it all subsided. And you didn't crumble in that silence. You discovered who you are. You were acutely aware of not just what they were, but also who you are. You saw the amount of energy you had been giving to others who weren't giving it back. You realized how much of who you were had been shaped by their constrained perception of you. You started rebuilding on the truth without the conditional affection and phony support networks. 10 viewpoints weren't necessary. Your vision was the only one you need. And you're unstoppable now that you have it. You recognize your value without waiting for validation from others. You may see your route and follow it without permission, and they are haunted by it, because the version of you that they left behind was still learning how to accomplish things. However, the version that emerged from that quiet is locked in. They believed that your objective would become blinded if you broke your heart. It cleansed your lens instead. You are more than just existing. You're taking deliberate action. They can tell you're not second-guessing yourself anymore. They are aware that they did not ruin you. They triggered a deeper part of you. They sparked a degree of concentration and confidence they hoped you would never achieve. They are now perplexed as they thought you would contract, yet you grew. Isolation stripped you of your illusions, yet they believed it would take your spirit. The haze of their views is no longer with you. You've become so clear-eyed that, in retrospect, even your history seems different. Their intention to smash you only made room for vision to return. And now you see everything for what it really is, including them. 11th, your message thundered, even though they expected quiet to silence you. They believed that by being silent, ignoring you, and acting as if you were unimportant, they would be able to suppress your voice. They thought you would stop dancing if they stopped applauding. Should people cease discussing you, you would become irrelevant. They didn't understand that you weren't first propelled by their loudness. You didn't say it to get attention. You were living in harmony. Furthermore, a microphone is not necessary for the reverberation of such reality. Something significant occurred the instant they attempted to silence you. You stopped speaking to be heard and began living in a manner that made you unavoidable. Your development turned into your statement. Your protest turned into your tranquility. In places they believed to be empty of you, your constancy became the murmur that persisted. They made an effort to keep you quiet, but your development began to speak for itself. And now your life is yelling what they sought to bury without even trying. They are unable to quit observing. The fact that someone they rejected is still alive, luminous, and moving with purpose is something they can't stop thinking about. Because every action you take, every objective you accomplish, and every ounce of tranquility you possess all force them to face the harsh reality that they were mistaken about you. There was no need for an argument. There was no need for you to defend yourself. You went on a campaign to make no claims. You just let the results of your life do the talking. And it is the most powerful thing because nothing is more audible than a soul that is healed, focused, and unafraid to walk with purpose. Now, your existence haunts the same individuals who attempted to eradicate you. Your silence now conveys more truth than their words ever could, not because you're yelling. You are now indisputable. They may attempt to behave as if you are no longer important, ignore you, or even scroll past your name. However, they carry the burden of your transformation in their hearts. They thought that by being silent, you would be silenced. Rather, it made your message louder. They unintentionally made you the loudest part of their tale, even if they intended to terminate yours. Number 12. The portions they couldn't reach were healed by their absence, which was intended to hurt you. You were meant to be broken by their departure. To make you feel insignificant, unwelcome, and depressed by their absence was the whole purpose. Making sure you felt it was more important than just leaving. However, they were unaware that you were not destroyed by their leaving. You were delivered by it. You weren't just left behind. You were set free. As soon as they left, the emotional grip they had on you began to loosen. And then, slowly, things began to change. Not externally, but within. Your own voice eventually began to raise after you had stopped hearing theirs. Their judgment, guilt trips, and passive-aggressive jabs were not audible to you. At last, you could hear yourself. And your inner kid had space to grow for the first time in a long time. The part of you that never stopped striving to impress them, win their approval, and prove yourself to them finally let out a breath. Their absence turned into a complete system reset and detox. When the manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional tugging stopped, your nervous system started to relax. Your thoughts became silent. Your heart ceased preparing for the blow. And in that calm, you started to recall your true self before their influence warped it. You weren't insane. You weren't excessive. You weren't too delicate. Someone who could never fully love you without trying to dominate you had a profound impact on you. Their departure made room for mending you were unaware you needed. Yes, you began to mourn what you had lost. More significantly, however, you began to reclaim the things they had buried: your value, your voice, and your strength. They didn't leave you feeling empty. You were left clear. It's obvious enough that you were never the issue. Clear enough to understand that they couldn't provide you with what you were pleading for. They didn't leave to assist you. However, that's precisely what happened. Heaven utilized what they intended to hurt you as a way to heal you. The door that led you back to yourself was the one that they slammed. And now that you're free, you're not furious. 13. They chuckled as you sat by yourself, oblivious to the fact that you were changing into someone else. They chuckled. They engaged in gossip. They made jokes about your supposed fall off, your seclusion, and your quiet. They thought you were losing because you weren't there. Your silent season was seen by them as a sign of weakness and failure, proving that they were justified in leaving. They believed that you were unimportant, damaged, trapped, and stagnant since you were sitting by yourself. However, they were unaware that something significant was taking place in that isolation. You weren't disintegrating. You were settling in. You were developing behind the scenes while they were occupied amusing one another. A version of you that they weren't prepared to meet was being watered by each tear you shed. Silence each day was a step closer to your recovery, development, and enlightenment. You didn't wait to be noticed. You were coming full. They will never have the self-discipline to accomplish the inner work that you were doing. Additionally, the change occurred completely rather than noisily. You walk differently now. You have a distinct speech pattern. Your energy doesn't need permission anymore. It requires deference. And because they don't even recognize who you've become, the same people who once laughed at you can no longer laugh. The radiance is genuine. It's very clear. You carry an unbreakable peace. And that's what scares them, because they secretly recall the version of you that they rejected, the one they believed they had solved. And that version is no longer available at all. Someone they can't classify, control, or make fun of has taken its place. You outgrown their perception of you in its entirety, and they were too preoccupied with their laughter to notice it. Because of the weight of your presence, they are now uneasy. You do not perform, you do not explain, and you do not pursue. And that unfamiliarity, it's eerie, because if you've changed this much without anybody seeing, what more can you do that they won't see? While you sat by yourself, oblivious to the evolution occurring, they chuckled. And now that you've become someone they can't remember, define, or access, the joke is no longer amusing. Number 14. They're rushing to get back in touch now. but you no longer feel the need to be understood. They are now making a gradual and subtle effort to reappear by like your posts, sending sporadic messages, and attempting to gauge if there is still room in your life for them. They are being rattled by the change. They are unable to sense your energy anymore, not because they miss you profoundly or meaningfully. They can no longer reach you, read you, or rattle you like they used to. And now they are being choked by that quiet, which they utilized as a weapon. They feel bad about it. They know deep down that they treated you badly. They are aware that they made a genuine mistake. The realization that the version of you they previously rejected no longer exists, however, is what hurts them the most. You've changed. You have become disengaged. Their viewpoint no longer has any emotional weight since you've healed enough. That's where your real strength is found, in your indifference, not your coldness. They're attempting to re-establish contact with someone you've outgrown, yet they want to continue where things left off. People who are determined to misunderstand you no longer need to listen to you. You no longer have to defend yourself to those who just heard you through their own ego. And until your absence reverberated more loudly than your words ever could, you no longer need closure from those who didn't appreciate you. You've come to terms with what occurred because you no longer need it to make sense, not because it was acceptable. You were no longer in need of understanding. At that point, the actual release took place. The doors didn't just shut at that point. They made a seal, not because you're angry, but because the calm you currently possess doesn't belong in confused spaces. You've been upgraded. You have a different frequency. The circle to which they formerly belonged has gone, and your standards are higher. You're free, not resentful. Furthermore, they are just now beginning to realize that the window they believed would always be open has silently, at last, and permanently closed. An audience is not necessary for peace. Additionally, your life is no longer a platform for their atonement. They believe that if you were isolated, you would break. They believe that if you were silenced, you would disappear. They believe that if you were cut off, you would be chopped down. However, every effort to minimize you simply served to highlight your true need. Your soul wasn't crushed by their absence. Your rebirth was made possible by it. Your value was not destroyed by their rejection. It paved the way for your discovery. And the hallowed space where your purpose took root and your strength developed was the stillness they weaponized. You've changed from the version of yourself that they disregarded. You're unapologetically aligned, smarter, and wiser. They never really saw you in the first place, which is why they don't recognize you. They misjudged the power of your becoming because they were so preoccupied with managing your presence. However, the change is now indisputable. The picture is more distinct. Without yelling, the voice is louder. The light is genuine and hasn't been turned down for their comfort. You weren't.